You all tonight, and so exciting to hear about other young disciples who have expressed a desire to be a part of our work here. We're really glad to have you all here. You add so much to us as a congregation and to me personally, and our mission here is to make disciples. Part of that is bringing people to come to Jesus, and part of that is helping each other become like Jesus. And for you to be a part of our work means that you want to become like Jesus more, and you want to help us become like Jesus more. So that's great. By the way, all of you college-ish are invited over to the house tonight, and you're welcome to come. Just bring your favorite soft drink of choice, Coke Zero preferred, but you just bring whatever you want, and you're welcome to come. I've missed our time we've gotten to have together in the college class, and looking forward to reconnecting with you tonight. I mentioned to you all this morning that Melvin and Shirley Curry were here, and what a joy it was. They totally surprised me to come down and check in and see how I was doing and how we are doing as a church. Got to visit with them some afterwards, so that was a great blessing. And I hate sometimes to take advantage of the fact that I'm up here so I can talk about my friends who are here, and you all have friends who come, but you can't come up here and talk about them. But hey, that's the benefit of being a preacher, right, I guess. So Carly Joe's granddad, Joel, is with us tonight, and I hope you all have a chance to meet Joel Fields. You all have heard me tell stories from time to time about the 6 years that I spent up in Indiana, in Portage, Indiana. And Joel was one of the elders. In fact, he was the elder that called me and asked me if I was ready to become a Hoosier. And so through him, a door was open to 6 years of working with wonderful people and 30 years now, or 20 years now, of wonderful friendships. And so it's always good to see him. I'm glad you're able to be with us tonight. Well, I sure hope that you all are taking a stab at working your way through the Bible in our daily Bible reading schedule. The other day, Karen Lowe came up to me and said, I don't know where I'm at. Can you tell me? And she was way ahead. So that was fantastic. If you look at the way it's set up on the front, there's a schedule of week by week. And then in the inside, you can see the day-to-day readings. Part of drawing nearer to God, which is what we want to focus on this year, is drawing nearer to Him in His Word. And I promised you at the start of the year that I would do some lessons, as many as I could at least, taken from whatever that week's reading was. In this past week, the readings were centered on the patriarchal stories in the book of Genesis. And Jacob, I guess you would say, was probably the feature of attention in the section on the schedule for this past week. So I want to talk with you tonight about the stories involving Jacob. And I want to begin in the account that Miles read for us tonight, here in Genesis chapter 25, in the story of the birth of these two boys. This story has a familiar ring to its start because it involves a mother who is barren. In this case, it is Rebecca. By the way, do y'all remember your rule, what you're supposed to remember that I always confuse? And I already tonight called Austin Haley by the name of another person. So it's going to be that kind of night, right? So you have to remember that half the time when I say Rebecca, I mean Rachel. And when I say Rachel, I mean Rebecca. That's your problem. You're just going to have to figure it out tonight. But here we're starting with Rebecca, all right? But it's a familiar story because she is a woman who cannot have children. And she prays, and the Lord grants the prayer of Isaac for his wife Rebecca to conceive. That's in 25:21. In verse 22, she's struggling, as many of you expectant mothers have experienced the activity of your baby. And the Lord says in verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb. And of course, this story is going to be the explanation for the fountainhead of 2 nations, the nation of Israel and the nation of Edom. Verse 24 says, when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. That's kind of like Ronnie's story. Nobody believed that they were going to have the twins. And behold, there were twins. But I don't think they look like these twins. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. And so they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And as you all know from your study of the Bible, these names have a significance to them. The names of Esau or Edom reflect his hairiness and his redness. And the name Jacob here is a play on words as well. Although it's not exactly clear what the play on words actually is. So your Bible may have a footnote of some sort on the naming of Jacob here. What we do know is his name has some connection with the word heel. It's a play on the word heel. What is not exactly clear is what the actual word play is. This word could have the connotation of sort of digging your heels in to be a guard and a protector. And that's one possible way to understand the name of Jacob, something along the lines of God protects. But the reference to a heel can also refer to tripping someone up. In fact, in the book of Job, there's a nice reference to help see this. Job 18:9 says, "A trap seizes him by the heel. A snare lays hold of him." And because the word heel can have this connotation of tripping someone up, the word heel can also carry with it the connotation here of tripping someone up by deceit or by trickery, taking something from them by dishonest means that initially belonged to them. We'll keep all of that in mind as we go through the story of Jacob, and particularly the idea of someone who tricks, the idea of someone who deceives. If you look at verse 27, it says, "When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob," my Bible says, "was a quiet man." You know that I always like to use classic works of art to try to raise all of our level of sophistication, so I thought I'd use one here as well to kind of picture the difference between the two. I think a lot of us, as we've read this passage, we thought the point was that Esau was this brawny, manly, outdoorsy type, and that Jacob was this sissy, this mother's boy type. Let me just remind you of something. As we're going to see at the end of the lesson tonight, Jacob wrestled the angel of the Lord all night long. And the angel of the Lord could not get him to turn loose. And not to make too much of that, but one angel slaughtered 185,000 Assyrians in one night. So we probably ought to be careful with assuming that Jacob was some kind of mama's boy. In fact, the actual word that's used, although no translation I checked actually used the word, is the same word used of Job in Job 1 and 2 when it says Job was a blameless man. And I think that's probably what is meant by the connotations that our Bibles give when it says something like Jacob was a quiet man, a peaceful man, a still man, whatever your translation says. It's to put him in contrast to the more rambunctious Esau. But it's not a matter of strength. It's not a matter of grit. It just simply is a testimony perhaps to his character. So then we have presented for us by Moses here quite the conundrum. Is Jacob going to be the cheater, the trickster, as Tolkien would say? Is he going to be tricksy? Or is he going to be the blameless man, the one calm and quiet and peaceful in his integrity? Well, that's what the rest of the narrative of Jacob is going to describe for us, including the end of this chapter. So look at this famous story here at the end of Genesis 25, verse 29. "Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. He's hungry. Now, he's supposed to be a skillful hunter, but apparently, at least that day, he came up empty-handed. Esau said to Jacob, 'Let me eat some of that red stew, for I'm exhausted.' Therefore, his name was called Edom, because of the redness. Jacob said, 'Sell me your birthright now.' Remember, Esau is the older. Now, I would point something out to you. If you skip back up to verse 23 to the statement about 2 nations are within you, did you notice what the last part of that verse says? The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. Esau is the older, and yet what's normally the case is going to be turned upside down, and the older is in fact going to serve the younger. Well, here you have the older who has the birthright, the double portion of inheritance that comes to the firstborn. Jacob senses that there's an opportunity here and says, sell it to me. Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Now, nobody, in my view, comes out of that story looking great. Esau certainly doesn't come out of it looking good, because he's someone who's willing to trade away the wonderful God-given blessing of the double portion of inheritance just because of his temporary bodily urges to have something to eat. But I don't think that we can necessarily say that Jacob comes out of this story looking so good either, because rather than get the birthright through a more proper, even-handed, open-handed legal means, he's manipulative. He's cunning. He's sort of a trickster, taking advantage of his brother. But of course, his capability for deception comes in full bloom when we come over to Genesis chapter 27. So in addition to the birthright, the older son typically would receive a type of prophetic blessing from his father. That time has come, Genesis 27, verse 1. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son. And he answered, here am I. He said, behold, my old, I don't know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver, your bow, go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now, we were already told, although I didn't read the verse, back in chapter 25 and verse 28, that Isaac and Rebekah have chosen favorites. Isaac loves Esau because he ate of his game. May I say to you that that doesn't necessarily place Isaac in the best light either. In fact, almost like father, like son, Esau evaluates things on the basis of what he can get to eat, and apparently Isaac does as well. So now that favoritism will display itself in Isaac's determination to give his father's blessing to his son. Now at this point, there are 4 people. We never see all 4 at one time. We only see 2 at a time. And quite frankly, none of the 4 come off looking good. At least that's my view. Isaac doesn't come off good because of who he intends to bless. Someone that the text has made clear and will continue to make clear is unworthy. But Rebekah does not come off looking good either. Verse 5, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, then she explains what's about to happen. Verse 8, now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 young goats so that I may prepare them delicious food for your father such as he loves. Verse 11, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. His mother says, let your curse be on me. So then, verse 14, he went and took them and brought them to his mother. His mother prepared delicious food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, put them on Jacob, the younger son, and the skins of the young goats she put on his hands, and the smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and the bread which she'd prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. Now the third scene, Jacob and his father. Verse 18, so he went to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? That's the first of several indications in this text that Isaac is suspicious. Verse 19, Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game that your soul may bless me. That's Jacob's first deception. Verse 20, but Isaac said to his son, how is it that you found it so quickly, my son? He answered, because the Lord your God granted me success. That's deception number 2, and I think you'd have to call it blasphemy, right? Because not only is Jacob lying, he's invoking the name of God as a part of this lie. Verse 21, then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near. that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son, Esau, or not. Now, I don't want to go beyond what the text says, but doesn't it seem to you like Isaac is pretty suspicious? In fact, to go to the point where he even says, let me touch you, kind of would indicate to me that perhaps Isaac has some reason to be distrusting. Maybe he's come to know something of Jacob's character. And so, Jacob went near, verse 22. And his father Isaac felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. And notice once more, are you really my son Esau? And he answered, I am. And so he brings forth the food to eat. Verse 26, then his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him. If you can see in this passage over and over again, it's emphasizing the senses, right? What Isaac can't see, what Isaac can smell, what Isaac can touch, what Isaac can taste. And so verse 27, see the smell of my son is as the smell of a field the Lord is blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Listen to verse 29. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Now wait a minute. Do you remember what the Lord said back in chapter 25 and verse 23? Who is supposed to serve whom? The older is supposed to serve the younger. Presuming that Isaac heard that, which I have no reason to see why he would not have, Isaac just told the person he thinks is the older that the younger is going to serve you. So Isaac does not come off good in this story at all because he seems to be subverting what the plan of God was. Well, verse 30, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac, his father, Esau came in. He prepared delicious food. And you know the rest of this story. Esau is enraged and infuriated that his brother has cheated him out of this blessing. Verse 35, your brother came deceitfully and he's taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he's taken my blessing. Well, now wait a minute here. He didn't exactly take away your birthright. You made a foolish trade. So you see what I mean here? Nobody comes out looking good in this story. Well, verse 41 says Esau hated Jacob. And basically says, it doesn't look like Dad's going to be alive much longer, and when he passes away, I will kill my brother. So his mother sends him away. Now, I want you to notice the characteristics of Jacob's deception in this story. First of all, this deception is predicated on the inability of his father to see. His father can taste, smell, and touch, but he can't see. In the second place, in this story, one sibling is switched out for another. One brother is switched out for another. And third, in this story, the younger replaces the older. Now, every set of twins I have ever known, as soon as I ask, like, Austin, who's older, you or Reagan? Here, this happens all the time. Reagan, by how much? 1 minute. They always know, and they always know exactly how much, right? Well, these boys certainly knew. And Esau is enraged that his brother has taken advantage of him and cheated him. And quite honestly, I think as the reader up to this point, we ought to be a little bit disturbed. Like, he's just going to get away with this? He's just going to go up to see his uncle Laban and he gets off scot-free with both the birthright and the blessing? Well, let's skip over to chapter 29. Jacob goes into the service of his uncle Laban. And while he is there, he falls in love with Laban's daughter, Rachel. She's introduced to us in chapter 29 and verse 11, Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Rachel basically means you, like a beautiful little lamb. But she has a sister. And so in verse 15, the text says, Then Laban said to Jacob, Because you're my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages be. Laban had 2 daughters. Now the name of the older was Leah. Her name means cow. Now we always snicker when we hear that. I'm not 100% sure that name is to be interpreted in a super negative way. There's various interpretations, if you read commentaries about her name, that doesn't necessarily have to mean, like I heard one time say, that's the Bible way of saying that she had a nice personality, all right? Well, that may in fact be the case. I don't know. But what we do know is this: she is older than her sister, but Jacob is not attracted to her. He is attracted to Rachel. Verse 17 says, Leah's eyes were weak. And again, there's debate as to what that means. But Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance, and Jacob loved Rachel. So he commits that he will serve 7 years in Laban's house if he can marry Rachel. Verse 20 says, So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days, because of the love he had for her. Christy used to always accuse me of writing Harlequin romance novels, so I thought I'd use that voice here just to see if that came across. Now, I think we are supposed to read it kind of like that because of what happens next. This looks like this is going to be some sappy love story. Verse 21, Then Jacob said to Laban, Give me my wife that I may go into her. My time's completed. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Verse 25, And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. Now what has just happened here? Well, what has just happened here is exactly what Jacob just did to his father. You have a deception because of the inability to see. He took advantage of his father's failing eyesight, but in this case, Laban has taken advantage of the nighttime in the tent and the darkness. In this account, you have one sibling switched for another. It's not brothers this time, though, it's sisters. Except in this count, it is the older, Leah, who's going to replace the younger. The point I want you to see is, as you read through these stories, you may think that Jacob is getting away with things that actually the narrator of the Bible story is telling us he's not going to get away with them. Let me illustrate this with another story. Turning your attention back to the account with Jacob, Esau, Isaac, and Rebekah. Remember that in this account, that Jacob deceives his father regarding his brother. And in doing so, he takes the place of the favored son, or the favored son is subverted. He has the rug pulled out from under him, so to speak. Isaac's favored son, Esau. Do you remember that the account said that his mother was going to take 2 young goats, and it was not only the food that she would prepare, but also it was the skin of those very goats that would be used in the deception of Isaac? Which brings another point, that clothing is going to be used in this deception. Clothing is used to take advantage of his father to pull off the trick. And then remember that Isaac wondered over and over again, questioning suspiciously, Are you really my son? Now with that in mind, let's skip ahead a few chapters and a few years to the account that's found in Genesis chapter 37. This is the story of Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers. You know this story well. The text in chapter 37 starts off by telling us several details. It tells us how old Joseph was. In verse 2, he's 17. It tells us at the end of verse 2 that he had brought a bad report of the brothers to their father. And if you think that's just simple childish snitching and tattletelling, you don't know these boys, but you will here in just a minute. Verse 3 tells us that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. You would think that people will learn that parental favoritism is not a good idea. But the mistake is repeated here, and gives him a special robe. Most of our translations at the end of verse 3 call it the robe of many colors. There's some debate as to exactly what it means. Obviously, there was a special ornate robe to indicate how much he loved his son, Joseph. And verse 4, not surprisingly, when his brothers see this, they see their father's favoritism. It causes them to hate their brother Joseph. They are unable to speak peaceably to him. And this hatred is intensified when Joseph tells them about the dreams he's had, which you know, in which both dreams indicate that Joseph is going to rise to a position in which his brothers will come and bow down before him. Verse 12 says the brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Jacob sends Joseph to go check on them. And so he goes to track them down. When his brothers see him coming in verse 18, they conspire to kill him. Over and over again in the previous verses, we're told that they hate him. And we know from Scripture that the person who hates his brother is a murderer. So they hate their brother. They literally want to kill him. And verse 19, they said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say, if fierce animals devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Have you ever been to the hotel, the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated? It's been turned into a civil rights museum, and out in the front there's a stone memorial, and it quotes these words, here comes this dreamer, let us kill him and see what will come of his dreams. It's chilling when you see that, but even more chilling to consider that these are flesh and blood brothers conspiring to kill their kin. Well, you know what happens? Reuben says, well, let's put him in a pit. Let's not take his life, thinking that he could save his brother. But while he's away, caravanners come by. Judah says, hey, if we kill him, we don't make any money. If we sell him to these slave traders, at least we'll make some money off of him. So they sell him into slavery. How do they cover their tracks? Verse 31, then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they set the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether this is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Do you see what's happening here? Here, sons are deceiving their father regarding a brother, just like Jacob did his father. Here they are taking the place of the favored son, just like Jacob did when he deceived his father. They've killed a goat in their deception, just like Jacob did to deceive his father. And that clothing has now been used in their deception, the bloody coat of many colors, just like he used clothing to deceive his father. Except in this case, it's not the question, is this my son? But it is Jacob's heartbreaking statement, it is my son's robe. You think Jacob got away with the tricks he pulled, the deceptions he engaged in? Verse 34, Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. And thus his father wept for him. The simple point I want to draw out to you, it's the point that I think Moses wants us to see in these stories, is that you're going to reap what you sow. And if you sow a life of duplicity and dishonesty, you're going to reap the very same thing. If you are dishonest with others, you cannot be surprised when others are dishonest with you. If you want to see a very sad description of a man's life, go toward the end of the book in chapter 47 when Jacob meets Pharaoh and Pharaoh is asking about his life. And Jacob describes his life like this. Genesis 47:7, then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of my years of my life, and they've not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their sojourning. I've had a hard, disappointing life. That's the life of a liar. But there's more to see from these stories. We all know the adage, like father, like son. And it cannot be any surprise to us that Jacob's sons practiced deception as well. Not only with regard to him, but also with regard to others. For example, do you remember the terrible story in Genesis chapter 34 when people from the city of Shechem meet the family of Jacob, and one of the men of the city of Shechem, whose name is Hamor, sees the daughter of Jacob, whose name is Dinah, that he forces himself upon her in a humiliating way. But then they make an offer, the people of Shechem do, that they will arrange a marriage between Dinah and the man in question so that there could be sort of a treaty between Jacob's family and their family. The sons of Jacob tell them, that you can see this in verse 13, hey, that sounds good with us, except to be a part of our family, everybody in our family is circumcised, so you've got to do the same thing. They say, that sounds good to us. And 3 days later, verse 25, when the people were sore because of the practice of circumcision, 2 sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city, and they massacre all the men of the city. Hey, just go through this ritual and we'll all be friends. 3 days later, they slaughter them all. And Jacob says in verse 30, you've brought trouble on me. How will people believe anything I say? They're not going to trust me anymore. Because his sons practiced the same dishonesty. And then, if it's possible, a story that's even worse in Genesis 38. I want to be delicate with this story because of all the kids here, just like the previous story. But Genesis 38 tells us the story of Jacob's son Judah, who also has sons, and one of them is married to a woman and he dies, and according to custom, his brothers are supposed to marry this woman, but eventually the brothers all die except for one, and Jacob doesn't want to lose his last son, and so he denies this woman whose name is Tamar and tells her to remain a widow in your house. Well, over the course of time, she decides this is a dishonest deal, and so she dresses as a woman of the night and entices Judah to come and to do business with her. But when she does so, he doesn't have anything at the moment to pay, and he has to give a pledge. And so the pledge that she asks for are pieces of clothing. Verse 18, your signet, your cord, and your staff in your hand. So she takes those as a pledge. Of course, she's disguised. He doesn't know who this is. She has deceived him because he deceived her. And then after this happens and she becomes pregnant and someone says, well, hey, you remember that former daughter-in-law of yours, Tamar? She's gotten pregnant. She's been immoral. She's in the place of a prostitute. In verse 24, Judah says, well, we've got to take her out and put her to death by burning her. And then she produces those articles of clothing that were a pledge. And he knew that he had been had. Again, a story of deception, a story involving disguise, a story that shows us that children learn from their fathers, daughters learn from their mothers, sons learn from their fathers. And the reason that these stories in Genesis seem to be so repetitive in some ways is because this cycle of deception just continues. Well, so how do we end on a high note after all that, right? Nothing but relentless dishonesty and consequences. Well, let's go back to one story that everybody knows, back to chapter 32. Remember that Jacob so infuriates Esau that Esau intends to kill him, which is why Rebekah sends Jacob away so that Esau can't find him and kill him. But he can't run from his brother forever. And in Genesis chapter 32, Jacob finds out that Esau is coming, and Esau has 400 men with him. It looks like it's going to be time to pay the piper. But the night before they are going to reconcile, the Bible contains what I think by anybody's account is a very strange and odd story, the one I alluded to a moment ago. Jacob sends all of his family and company across the stream, according to 32:23. Verse 24 says, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go. You think this is a mama's boy? He's wrestling the angel of the Lord, and now he's got a dislocated hip, and he's still hanging on. And he says, bless me. And he says, what is your name? And he said, trickster, supplanter, cheater, Deceiver, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. Here's the thing that I want to leave all of us with. If you haven't read Genesis for a real long time, if your knowledge of the patriarchs is like first grade Sunday school level knowledge, I got to tell you, if you've been doing these daily Bible readings and it's been a long time, you probably feel like, why didn't I realize these guys can be so terrible? Some of the worst stories in the Bible are the ones I've alluded to as antiseptically as I could tonight. They are, to put it mildly, flawed people. And yet, God was still willing to lock up and wrestle all through the night to give them a blessing. The point is, yeah, they have character flaws, for sure. They do terrible things. They bring horrible consequences on themselves and on others. They create ongoing legacies of sinfulness. But God still loves them. God cares for them. And he's willing to fight through the night to give them a blessing and maybe give them a new name. And that's what our great Lord and Savior Jesus Christ has come to do for all of us. All of us who in our own way have been dishonest. All of us who in our own way, as James said in the sermon this morning, have been adulteresses and double-minded people. And yet the Bible teaches that God loves us, and he loves us enough that he's willing to struggle with us so that he can transform us, so that he can give us a new name, so that we can be called the people like Jesus, so we can be Christians. And I hope in the midst of these lessons that I think are important for us to learn what not to do, that most of all tonight we can leave with the encouragement to know that while we may be faithless, God is always faithful. I hope that encourages you tonight. And if we can do something to help you in your striving with God so you can receive a blessing, let us know while we stand and